Okay, great. So hi everyone and welcome to UX Insiders. If there's anybody attending for the first time, my name's Rachel. I'm a researcher here at the UX Design Institute, and we offer a range of online courses for people looking to start a career in UX design. So this UX Insiders series is some live events that we host, and each event we are lucky to be joined by some of the most creative and interesting people in the field of UX right now. And really, the idea behind these events is to give some insight into what it's actually like to work in the UX industry. And today, we're really lucky to be joined by Harry French, and Harry is a UX researcher with wearOS at Google. And we're especially proud to say that Harry is actually a graduate, an alumni of the UX Design Institute. So Harry studied both our professional diploma in UX design and our professional certificate in UI design. And today, Harry is going to tell us all about how you can establish a career in UX research, and a bit about the skills and knowledge you need to be successful in this space. Okay, so before we officially begin, I just want to mention that there'll be time for Q&A towards the end of the event. So for anyone who's watching, if you could type any questions you have in the questions panel. And if you see a question that you are particularly interested in, if you could upvote it, and that just lets me know that it's a question that others are interested in hearing the answer to. So Harry, you're very welcome to UX Insiders. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Looking forward to chatting and diving into some questions at the end. So, yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be asked to be back.
Yeah, of course, of course. So I guess to start off, I know you have a presentation you're going to jump into, but before you do that, maybe you could just give us a really brief introduction to you and tell us a bit about your role as a UX researcher with wearOS.
Sure. So yeah, hey everyone. Obviously, I'm Harry. As introduced, I'm a UX researcher in Wear OS, which means Google's operating system for smartwatches. And as a UX researcher on Wear OS, it's kind of tricky. It's not just like any product because it's an operating system. You're responsible for first-party apps, third-party apps, different partners, so you're not completely just tied into Google as a company. And bit about my background, I'm actually coming from more of a design background, but I kind of in recent years kind of dipped more into UX research, which is obviously where I find myself now. And yeah, excited to jump into some slides, and it will help, obviously give more context. So I don't want to give too much away yet.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you for the intro. That's great. And yeah, I know you have a presentation, so I'll hand over to you to run through that whenever you're ready, Harry.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, but I'm actually going to share my entire window because we were having a bit of an issue with that. Okay, so apologies if everyone sees a mirror thing for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, cool. You can see that? Is that okay?
That's perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Great. So yeah, I'm going to talk about UX research at Wear OS at Google. I'm also going to kind of intro myself, and yeah, we'll dive into some questions at the end. Perfect. So yeah, hey, I'm Harry, and I'm a UX researcher based in London currently. So I've recently just moved to London for this role. So that's been interesting. What I'll cover today, I'm going to talk a bit about my journey, how I got into UX research, why. Then I'm going to talk a bit about my experience at UXDI, why I studied there, some of the skills that I still use today. And then I'm going to jump into UX research for Wear and what that means in comparison to how you might do research or design for different devices. And there's some different nuances. I'm also just going to talk about some common processes that we use here internally. And I'm also going to talk about the kind of differences between, academia, industry, what that means in your different day-to-day. And then, yeah, we're going to dive into some questions at the end. So my journey so far, obviously, so design to research. I started off kind of in my research path as when I did an internship as a CX researcher at Musgrave Retail Partners. So those of you in Ireland will know that Musgrave They own brands like SuperValue, Centra. So I was a CX researcher there, and I did an internship, and I was like running research in store with participants and different surveys and stuff based in Cork. So that was a fun time. And that was during while I was studying product design in Maynooth University. So that was my undergrad. And then I graduated as student of the year, fortunately. Um, then well, kind of simultaneously, so during my final year, I decided I wanted to do UX. I'd kind of found this passion for it through this module in my third year of my product design degree. And I found this UX DI course, and I was like, this looks great, going to give this a go. So I did that simultaneously in final year. Which, in hindsight was probably a lot to take on. And in fact, I did end up taking, the majority of the allotted time to complete the diploma. But yeah, got there in the end, and it was very worthwhile. Then I kind of had my sights set to work at this company called Each and Other. They're a UX design agency based in Dublin. And I got a graduate role as a UX designer there. I also put slash researcher because I kind of ended up doing mostly research projects. So that was, where I also kind of started to find my passion for UX research. So I worked there for about a year and a half. And that was also when I did my diploma in visual design, now known as, I think, the certificate or the diploma in UI design. And basically, Each and Other were super supportive and advocates of the UX/DI programs. So they supported me in doing this. And this was a huge upskill as a UX designer in general, and just in general as a UX researcher too. So I'll talk about the impact of that later. I also taught last year a module of design research to product designers in Maynooth University. So that was a nice way to kind of go back to the undergrad that I studied and give back a bit and engage with some students, some second years. So that was really rewarding. And then I got a job contracting as a UX researcher on the Google Calendar and Google Tasks team. So I was based in Dublin for a year on that contract, and they're all based in Zurich. So I was based remotely. But yeah, that was my kind of first intro to Google, my first taster of that. And then I went and applied for a full-time position on the Wear OS team at the end of last year, which is where I am today. So that's why I moved to London. And yeah, cool. So I want to talk a bit about UX/DI now, as I mentioned, why I did it, and, how it still stood to me today. So first of all, why UX/DI? So the diploma in UX design was the first course I did that I mentioned. And I wanted to do it because I wanted to be able to ground my passion for UX in tangible methods, dedicated, defined principles, and just being able to articulate myself. I wanted a dedicated UX qualification at the time because I thought, that would show employers I was serious about UX. I wanted to just be able to have an outlet to practice, which obviously, you can do, but it's really nice to have a structured program to kind of walk you through all the steps initially, just so you are aware of all the steps and you're not missing anything. And obviously I wanted to build on my portfolio as a UX designer applying for jobs, because a lot of my portfolio at that time would have been very product design heavy, in the sense that it was more kind of like industrial design, so physical products and services and experiences. So I wanted to also kind of bring that software angle through the UX course. Then the diploma in visual design. So this was when I was working as a UX designer already. But I wanted to kind of bolster my designs with validated practices. I really wanted to speed up. So that was a huge thing. I was getting tasked with, UX design projects, visual design tasks, and I just found myself being slower than I felt like I should be. And this was because I didn't have that foundational awareness of where to start, and, setting my grids, my typography, my colors, so all those different things. So I was able to speed up ultimately, understanding designing for different devices and breakpoints. For some reason, this was something that really used to throw me. I used to never understand, wait, do you just design it for desktop and then it just automatically shrinks? Obviously not. I know that now, but that was how I used to think. So it's just nice to be able to learn that officially. Again, practice and just build on my portfolio some more. Quick snapshot. This is just a bit of a cover of what I did in that digital design course. So it was a project about a banking application. And again, I mentioned the different breakpoints, so designing for different ones like that. So that was definitely a really fun and creative project to work on. So some of the skills that I still use daily, and as a UX researcher, because you might be thinking, hey, Harry, like you did this course in UX design and visual design, like they're not relevant for UX research. Well, I'm here to tell you that they are. So what I kind of took away from that is the ability to articulate UX and reference UX principles and research methodologies, because, you know, as a UX designer, you still have to be familiar with those, and being able to communicate and collaborate with designers and engineers, because you've kind of, specifically working as a designer, you've been on the other side. So you kind of have that direct insight into almost why they're asking you something. So you can kind of preempt that, which is actually really nice. And yeah, show the designer that you know exactly what they're talking about as well, and pushing back when you need to and challenging them. Engineers then the same. You know, we learned about developer handoff in the UX design course. So that was a really nice way to be able to communicate engineers and developers as well. And then the visual design diploma, this one, I feel like this one really stood to me, because I was just able to, now I'm able to produce like quite visually impactful research reports. I'm a lot quicker with visual design. You know, I've got my templates, I got the stuff set up. Even this presentation was designed off a grid in the background. And, you know, I had my color palette ready, I had everything ready, and then I can just go and I don't have to like worry about making visual changes like halfway through. Yeah, prototype, still able to like prototype stimuli for testing. Sometimes we have to be able to jump in and do that. Championing visual accessibility, so I can just like ad hoc call out color contrast issues on the visual designers, and they're like, oh yeah, thank you for noticing that. So stuff like that. And overall storytelling, I think, is really important, talking about why you did something. Yeah, and the visuals just like playing hugely into that, particularly when you're talking with, you know, leadership, people in high up positions. The visuals really matter, and they really stand out versus, you know, other people who don't necessarily have that visual design background. So that's kind of talking about my UXDI experiences. I'll kind of reference more of that a bit later too. And yeah, please ask me any questions that you have about that course. Now I want to talk about UX research for Wear OS. And what that means, because to be fair, not everyone knows what Wear OS is. I didn't a couple of years ago. So yeah. So when we talk about Wear OS, you might think, oh, it's the Google Pixel Watch. Actually, it's not. So that's a different team. We do support the operating system for the Google Pixel Watch, but we also power the Samsung Galaxy watches. We also power other different watches. So that's an important distinction. So what is Wear OS? Again, the Google smartwatch operating system, or Android on a watch. So smartwatch versus mobile. So the average smartwatch session is only 5 seconds long, right? Compared to an average phone session of 3 minutes and 52 seconds. And the implications of this are huge. If you can imagine, you know, your designs are only going to be looked at for maybe a couple of seconds at a time. You really, really, really have to prioritize what is the most important information that you're going to surface to someone in those couple of seconds. You know, while it's the device that they have on them all the time, it's not like a phone in the sense that you go on and then you see an Instagram notification and then you end up on Reels for half an hour and then you go on LinkedIn and then you go on Twitter, blah, 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 blah. Whereas the watch is a lot more focused. So you're less likely to kind of be swayed, which is a positive in my mind, because it kind of reduces distractions when you're trying to get simple tasks done, which is really nice. But as I said, there's different goals. So the aim when you're designing or, you know, researching or whatever, building an app on a smartwatch, is that you don't want to just simply put your phone app on people's wrists, make it smaller, ship it, you know, just make sure we've got all the features, because that's actually not necessarily what people want. So that's why it's really important as a UX researcher on this team to take a step back and hey, actually, do we know that people want this on a watch? Yeah, it works really well on mobile, but we need to first validate that here. So you can see the example on the right, Google Docs, Google Sheets, tables, things like that. Like, why would someone want to do that on a watch when it's so much easier on the phone? So it's not about just bloating the watch with a ton of different cool features. So the context of use. So smartwatch users are often active on the go, and they're often doing something else while using your app. We hear all the time smartwatch users are really interested in fitness, notifications, things like that. So really glanceable things. While they're doing something else. They don't want to be sucked in to staring at their watch for ages. So you can see here an example of Google Maps. So Google Maps, on the left on the mobile, quite, and then, informational UI, there's lots of different things going on. But on Wear OS, you can see that it's quite a simple interaction because, again, we know that people aren't glancing at their watch for very long. They can also access a map view here, but this is just an example of one of the screens where it just really simplifies that user flow, that user journey for people. So I also want to take a look and just kind of walk this through another example. So let's take a look at Google Calendar, a tool that probably many of you might be familiar with. So on web, if you use Google Calendar, this is what it looks like. So, typical kind of digital calendar tool, got your different events, your Monday to Friday kind of gig. You've got your month view, you've got all this different information going on. On mobile, then again, a lot of people are prefer the schedule view, condenses their information when they're on their phone. It's likely that they're only interested in what's going on today, not always, but this is just something that, I'm hypothesizing here. And then on Wear, right, I'm really interested in what's going on right now or what's my next upcoming event. I don't need to scroll on my watch for, minutes on end looking ahead to next month. I mean, I can if I want to, but I'm unlikely to want to do that. So why would we prioritize that as a team? You know what I mean? So process, ideally. Now, a lot of you will be familiar with this classic double diamond, you've heard it all before. And it is a good foundation. It is a good framework to follow to make sure you're checking those boxes and you're going through your process thoroughly. However, in reality, it's not so linear. And you can see this kind of squiggle, the spaghetti. Maybe it's exaggerated, but basically you're bouncing between all of these different phases until you ultimately arrive at deliver. And even still then, you might have to go back. So it's just one of those things where while it's a good foundation, you're going to be flipping between these a lot. It's very much an iterative process. And in Google, we have some extra steps. So you might recognize some words like define and develop, but we've got envision, concept, scope, validate, acceptance, release. They all sound like buzzwords, totally aware of that, but they do have very detailed outline steps. And again, they're very iterative. So while we might go to concept phase, we might iterate back, or we might go back to the define phase. Before we release, we have to go through acceptance and approval and make sure everyone's happy. And we might need to develop new concepts. We might even need to scope out something else, or validate a concept that we didn't think we needed to validate, or envision something else. So there's always room for exploration in any of these different steps. So again, it's not always linear. Collaboration then is super important, obviously. It's a bit of a no-brainer. So who do we collaborate mostly with? Mostly with UX designers. They'll be our kind of one-to-one partners, or maybe usually in Google and probably other companies too, there's more UX designers to UX researchers, and then you'll be kind of supporting different ones. Also product managers, again, there'll be more of these to us in a ratio. And these guys are your decision makers. If you're not familiar with this role, they're your road mappers, your planners, and they kind of steer things. But UX research has a huge strategic power too, in terms of steering what we do. And it's okay to challenge these partners too and push back. If your product manager says, hey, we need to build this feature tomorrow, say why. Why do we need to do this? Why do you want me to do this research? And then you might be able to come up with a better approach that they didn't know, because you're the domain expert in UX research. So yeah, that's kind of a caveat there. And engineers are kind of like on the other end of our process. In how we work, we very much a collaborative process and involved in every step of the way too. But product managers definitely tend to be the middleman between UX and engineers more often than not. But there's still a huge kind of like everyone chats to everyone, and workshopping and different things like that, where we're all trying to kind of come together. So when do we use different research types? So I've got some examples here, like foundational, generative, tactical, evaluative, kind of mapped to this double diamond here. And for example, in Google Calendar, what does this look like? So your research questions, as you know, will typically define your research plans and your methods. So if you say, hey, I need to understand the behaviors, needs, expectations of my user, I'm going to say, hey, well, we probably need to do some foundational research. Or if you say, how many people are happy with, what we launched, I'm going to say, hey, well, we probably need to do a survey and we can measure it that way. So different methods are most applicable depending on your research questions, which will come from your team or often yourself. So again, foundational, we might not know much yet, and that's totally okay. So we want to find out, like, what are the most important things people care about on their watch in relation to time management, calendaring, again, the Google Calendar example, and why and in what contexts. Again, the contexts are super important for Wear OS. Generative, so we need to prioritize. What should we prioritize? How can we translate these user needs into ideas? So again, we're in that define stage. And then tactical, we need early feedback. What concepts resonate the most with users? Why? What worked well? What didn't? Let's just speed date some concepts, get some early feedback. And then evaluative. So we're launching, or we've already launched. How can we measure success? And what metrics and data points can we track so we can constantly measure the health of whatever we've launched or whatever we're working towards? And how can we measure success is a question you should probably ask yourself from the start, because you need to define that with your team before you even set out to do anything. Because otherwise, if someone from leadership goes, hey, like, why is everyone doing this? And you go, okay, well, this is how we're going to measure success at the end, because this is, this is our goal. So it's really important to have these things clear in your mind from day one. So some key differences between industry and academia that I want to talk about, because there are two very different worlds. And while you learn a lot about the methods and the theories and the concepts, in academia and in courses, it is really important to understand the differences. And that's totally fine if you don't have that professional experience yet, because that will come. But just be aware of it, so you can even attest to it. So there's often shorter timelines. So this is one of the bigger ones. In the real world, you don't often get the luxury of having full, lovely timelines to do your end-to-end UX research project. Often you might be on 3 or 4 projects or teams at the same time, and you might get pulled into different ones at different points. But then the next day something might happen and leadership turns around and says, hey, everyone, this is more urgent. We need you to focus on this. So you might have to drop those things. And then the other thing might be due in 2 weeks because this thing is launching then, or we've committed to something. So things shift around, and ultimately you kind of timelines are shorter. But that doesn't mean you have to work yourself to the bone either. It's really important to maintain your work-life balance. I always advocate for, and just look after yourself as well. So while there's shorter timelines, that also means you can push back and be like, hey, actually, this other thing, sorry, I need to drop it. I can't do it anymore because X. And that's totally fine too. Whereas obviously in college, you still have to turn in all your assignments, but you have the luxury of time typically to do that. So again, I kind of touched on this, but business needs. So the business needs might just totally shift. For example, AI, this huge, massive push everywhere at the moment. So, we might get a request one day from senior vice presidents, and we need to just turn around and start working on AI. And that might be something that happens. And you just need to be able to roll with those punches. The project that you might be working on, needs to pause for right now, and that's okay too. Shifting priorities, again, kind of similar kind of vibe there. Championing the user, which seems like one that's obvious, but in the sense that you have to really champion the user in a professional sense, because not everyone, buys into UX, and that's okay too. So it's our job to show people why it's important to take time out to do research. Some people view it as, you're slowing them down, but actually you're just being thorough and you're making sure that what we deliver isn't going to be spat back out by users at the end of the day. So we really need to champion our users and, bring our cross-functional stakeholders along with us for the ride, and show them why we're doing something. What's the impact, what's the benefit. It might look a bit kind of airy-fairy to them, but we need to kind of communicate that accurately. Again, prioritizing and saying, no, this is something that you just have to do. Sometimes things are political. You might get research requests that someone just wants to prove to someone else that they're right. And it's okay to identify when that happens and turn around and say, hey, no, or tell your manager and be like, hey, actually, I don't believe in the integrity of this project, so I'm just not going to do it. Measuring success, as I touched on again, super important for your individual career as well, because as a UX designer or an engineer or a product manager, it's very easy to come in from the outside and see what they've delivered, what they've done. Let's say in a 12-month period. Oh yeah, I designed this screen. Great. Okay, you did that. The engineer, I coded this screen. Great. Product manager, I decided we should build this screen. Great. So they all have clear accountability. UX researcher, what did you do? So you have to really track that. Oh, well, actually, I informed the decision-making behind a lot of this. I directly have research, linked here. So just making sure that you're tracking your impact, which is my next point, and measuring your success. Recruitment then is another big one. Obviously, in any kind of UX research role, or you might have to do this as your UX designer or someone else. It's really important to make sure you're targeting the right cohort of people. There's no point doing research, even if you have everything else right, your method, your questions, everything's perfect. It's no point doing it with, the most random group of people possible. So if you're building a tool, an emailing tool, and you're researching people who don't have email accounts, then that's not a very good, accurate, or not going to generate very genuine insights. But you'll find if you put something in front of people, they'll still very confidently tell you if they like it or dislike it. And you can go, oh my God, yes. Oh my God, yes. But you have to be able to spot, or well, hopefully preempt in the first place. Obviously, that's a dramatic example that these aren't the right people that you should be researching with in the first place. So just your recruitment is really important, getting your participant criteria down, and also working with recruiters, and recruiting timelines takes a while too. So you want to make sure that you've baked enough of that time into your project from the start. So just to kind of wrap up, just checking my time. So yeah, if you're looking to get into UXR, which I would recommend, it's a good gig. Some tips. So the why is often far more important than showing the how to a potential employer or interviewer. And what this means is showing the decision-making behind why you chose a method. So say you have got a case study and your case study is about usability testing, and the results were really great. That's all well and good. What an employer, an interviewer really wants to know is, why did you decide usability testing was the right method in the first place? Why did you design the study this way? Why, did you loop in these people? Or why didn't you? So it's all about your decision making. That's really important. That really shows as well, if you're in an interview, if you're on the spot, and that you can think critically and reflect on your own work, as opposed to just saying, I did this, it was great, next. So professional experience matters too. Statistically, I think people with more professional experience interview better in UX research than people with academic experience. Obviously, this is not all you know, you don't have to take that with a grain of salt, as you will, but it is true. So yeah, just make sure that if you're trying to get into it, just try get your foot in the door, kind of anywhere to get at the start. I would say you don't have to aim, you know, for the big tech or whatever straight away. Just get yourself in the door and start playing around with it. Internships are a great way to do this without having to commit long term anywhere. Yeah, document your case studies as you go along, measure your impacts and reflect on the impact you had. Ask yourself, what did I actually, you know, contribute to this project when I reflect back on it? You know, it's often a collaborative project, often a team project. So make sure you've documented that for yourself. And then you could just keep like a running doc of all the things you did. I think that's usually a pretty good idea. So yeah, that's it from my presentation. So I guess we might go into questions now. So I'm going to just dip back in so I can see. So excuse this mirrored effect for a second. Cool.
Perfect. Harry, thank you so much for that. It was really, really interesting and some great presentation. So thank you. Really interesting. The 5 seconds on the watch is really stuck with me.
Yeah.
It's such a short amount of time to have somebody engaging. And to be able to design for that must be challenging but exciting, I guess. One question I have before I jump into the questions from the rest of the audience, it's just around, you know, how do you do kind of user testing with a kind of physical product like that? I know a lot of user testing, I know that we do anyway these days, is remote. So how do you cope with that?
Yeah, that's actually a really brilliant question, because on my previous teams, yeah, you could just do it remotely and so much more straightforward. And you don't need to, your timelines are more flexible because you don't need to lock in a physical location. Your dropout rates are less because all people have to do is sign to the laptop. So yeah, it's quite challenging. We're fortunate enough in our office to have a UX lab, which is this facility, which is 2 rooms. There's an observation room and a lab room. And we invite participants in, and we've got different camera setups that will record their wrists when we put a watch on them, and we'll ask them to conduct different tasks. And in the other room, there's like a one-sided mirror. So your stakeholders can come in and watch, but the participant and myself can't see in, and it's like soundproofed as well. So we've got a pretty lucky setup in that sense. I know some of my other colleagues as well, they'll post out watches to participants. You know, obviously they go through all the sorts of different hoops and hurdles that you need to kind of make sure that's a safe thing to do. But yeah, that's something that they'll do as well. But basically, ultimately, it is a lot more challenging. And you'll find when you have in person that a lot more people will cancel on you like last minute too. So yeah.
Okay, great. And in the scenario that you were mentioning where they post out the watches, would it then be kind of like a diary study, or, you know, people giving feedback?
It could be, yeah. It could be with a diary study for sure. Or they might even post them out and then they'll hop on a call together and get them to run through different tasks and basically just get them to feedback off that. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And here on my team in London, we do all in person.
Yeah, the lab sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's a great facility. We'd be lost without it.
Brilliant. And one question I saw earlier from the audience was just, you know, about why UX, what drew you to a career in UX, but specifically why research? I know a lot of people are interested in design, but your passion seems to be with research, like my own.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's really funny, actually, because I never imagined I would be a UX researcher. I had my heart set on being a UX designer. And then once I actually got into the reality of it, I was like, oh no, like 12 p.m., like midnight emails from clients telling you to, you know, change this color, or they just mocked it up in PowerPoint. Can you copy it instead? I was just like, oh God, this is not for me. It's just found it way too subjective. And when it was funny because I was put on so many research projects, and I was like, oh, I'd love to just do a design project for once. But then I kind of just loved to learn to love them because they were, while there's still subjectivity and you have to, challenge your own biases when you're doing research, there, it is a bit more concrete in the sense, and you can stand behind it when you've done it well. And it can be challenged, don't get me wrong, but I liked that aspect of it. And just also just informing the strategy behind things, because in the real world as a UX designer, you might just be getting told what to do, what concepts you should do. There's still elements of creativity, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I like the steering and the strategizing element.
Okay, great. Brilliant. And so I guess maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you kind of broke into your role in Google, and maybe a little bit about what the interview process was like. I know there'll be a few people watching who are interested in, breaking into a career in either UX design or UX research. So anything you could share about that would be great.
Yeah, totally. So it was actually quite funny. While I was working at the agency, a recruiter just hit me up on LinkedIn for this contracting position for a tech company. That's all I knew at the time. And this is actually interesting. So like about 50%, slightly larger than 50% of Google's workforces are something we call TVCs, which means temp vendor contractor. And they're basically embedded like full-time employees, except they're employed externally by different agencies. And that's basically what I was hired as. I was hired as a contractor. So that was a 2-interview process. First, just like general interview, and then a presentation and kind of Q&A with the team I was interviewing for. So that was relatively straightforward. You often hear about these 5-step interview process at these big tech companies. And then that meant when I was applying for a full-time position, I was able to skip the first screening round. So I was able to apply. I still had to apply as an external candidate, but I was able to skip that screening round because I'd already been working there for a year. But then I did have to do 4 interviews, and this is all you can look this up online as well. All this interview process is totally transparent, and you have to make a presentation as well. So it's less about a portfolio; it's more about preparing a presentation of case studies. And I was fortunate enough that my case studies, I was able to attest to ones I'd already done at Google. So I didn't have to hide anything in terms of confidentiality. So that was really nice as well, because that can be a barrier as an external candidate. If you're locked under NDAs from research projects that you did with someone else, and you kind of have to talk about something without really talking about something. But that's why the why is really important. So it's less about the what you did. It's more about I ran this project, but this is why I ran this project. And that's what they really are interested in. That's what really stands out.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I know a lot of people will be wondering how you can stand out and what makes a good or case study. So that's really good advice.
And like storytelling and visual design in the presentation really, I think, helped me stand out. Because like traditionally, a lot of UX researchers don't come from a design background. Well, some do, don't get me wrong, but not all. So they don't have, design skills necessarily. So the presentations might not look great. Disclaimer, like I'm sorry, but UX researchers, but yeah, so that's a good way to stand out too, because your interviewers will be designers, they'll be engineers, they'll be product managers, there'll be other researchers as well. So you get a mix of people interviewing you.
Okay, great. And obviously it's great to see how studying with the UX Design Institute has stood to you in your career. So I was really happy to see that. But I'm just wondering, how did having those 2 courses under your belt help you in the process as well?
In terms of the job process?
Yeah.
I think, initially with my first company, each another, they're familiar with the UXDI. So they were like, okay, well, that's a good stamp of just like, we know this person's gone through a certain process, and like, that's great. And then I had my case study in the portfolio as well. I think as well, just like when I was interviewing at Google, it was the storytelling, the visual design really like shone through my presentations. And yeah, other things like that. So yeah, I think it was mostly that, and then just being able to articulate different processes and things in a certain way was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So I know you mentioned AI yourself in your presentation, and we have a question here just about how you see UX research being affected by AI. So yeah, maybe you
Mm,
could tell us a bit about, whether you've been using it in your role at all. I know
mm.
here at UXDI, we're really excited about it and excited for how it might free us up some extra time to spend less on the kind of admin
Yeah,
and those kind of tasks and spend more time doing the good stuff. But yeah,
yeah, for sure.
it's been like,
I think it's really interesting. I think there's a major, because as we're UX researchers, we have a huge responsibility to protect the data of people that we conduct the research with.
mhm.
So you have to be very careful using AI with participant data. I would probably just advise not doing it for now, because it's your consent form consents for recording things like that. And unless you have it in your consent form that you're going to upload this thing to like a learning language model, you probably can't do it. Which initially I was like, oh my God, yes, I could just like paste all my open-ended responses in, anonymize names and things, and then ask it to give me the themes. But yeah, you definitely have to be careful and just consider the ethics. I think the ethics of AI are really important in UX research. That would be like my main thing before that I want to become a lot more aware of before kind of diving in. But it's really helpful for automating some things like a study announcement email, quick, you want to run a quick app script formula in Google Sheets, help it write that formula for you. So you're not giving it any data, but you're helping build yourself tools that can speed yourself up. So I think that's right now currently where I'm at with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that speeding up, I definitely relate to that. I think, people are a little bit nervous of anything new, and I think AI is new and people are a little nervous of it. But I think, certainly from our experience so far, it will be something to help us be better designers, better researchers, rather than something to be worried about. So I think that's a
Sure.
positive way to look at it. Um, so yeah, just wondering a little bit then on kind of your influence as a UX researcher, and we have somebody just wondering, do you feel like you have a lot of influence on projects? It certainly seemed from what you were saying that you're very involved in the process, but maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's one of the most influential roles you can have. And it's a role that leadership really values. And they'll go, okay, I've seen all these designs, but like, what has research said? Have you guys done research? And so you'll always be like pinged by someone like, do you have something to help me validate this before I show it to someone? So people really rely on you to give them confidence.
Mhm.
And so it is a very powerful role as well, in terms of sometimes we're just under resourced and we just have so many questions coming at us. And in terms of prioritizing, saying no, you have a lot of power in what happens, what actually gets done sometimes. So yeah, I think there's a huge influence. There is.
Yeah.
And you get paid more than UX designers. So there's that.
That's definitely a benefit for sure.
So you get valued more monetarily.
Okay, great. And so we have somebody wondering if you could choose a skill or a capability that you think is most key to kind of getting your first UX researcher role. What would you say that would be?
Yeah, being able to articulate the why and your storytelling and communication, I think, is really important. Yeah, I think so. It's so you need to be such a good communicator, I actually think, because you have all these people relying on you for things, and you need to be able to really like gel everyone together, and kind of like your presentation skills are a huge thing. Ultimately you'll be delivering these research reports and you need to present them to large audiences, and you need to be able to understand your audience. So like in my research reports, what I like to do is, yeah, I'll have my deep dive insights slides, very detailed, but then I'll have an executive summary section, but then I'll even have a one slide TLDR, which means too long didn't read slide. So that's for like the people who literally don't have like a minute to read your report. So you need to be able to cater to all these different people. So I think, yeah, and I just see a question coming in about like improving storytelling, communicating, and I think that comes from visual, and just like practicing, as well, your presentation skills. So yeah, I think just being able to tie things together, being really really critical about what you put. No one wants to read like a bunch of words on a slide kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think what you mentioned there about people not always having time to read the full report is really important. So being able to synthesize things like that is really important. Okay, so we've a couple of different questions coming in around portfolios, and portfolios are obviously top of everybody's mind. But yeah, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about, your own portfolio. We've some questions around what tools you used, any advice you might have. It's a broad topic, but anything you could tell us would be much appreciated, I think.
It's one of those like love-hate things. So initially, I think I made like my UX design portfolio on a website called like ux.folio or something, which was grand. It was very templated, and you just like uploaded your stuff and you kind of talk through your process. I since have a portfolio, but it's not like it's not really, I wouldn't look at it, basically. Don't look at it as a good example. But I think one of the interesting takeaways is that it wasn't a requirement for my interview process. And I've also in past interviewed for other UX research roles, and it wasn't a requirement there either. But you will be asked to do like a presentation. So I think that's more so just like making sure you're documenting stuff, so then you can lean on that content, because obviously you want to make it a bit bespoke every time, is useful. Obviously for designers, I know you need a very visual portfolio, but I probably can't attest to that because I never went down that route necessarily successfully. So yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And I guess kind of related to that, we have another question on just, your tips for somebody looking to get into UX research, maybe from a different career field. So maybe if somebody doesn't have that experience or looking to make
I think that's a huge thing, that sometimes people stop themselves putting themselves forward for things. I think there's a lot of transferable skills. You don't necessarily need to be the PhD student who studied HCI. I mean, you can, and you'd probably be very successful, don't get me wrong, but you don't necessarily need to be. So you can have interesting backgrounds. And I think someone with dual backgrounds often stands out in more of a positive sense than just everyone else who's gone through the same learning processes. So yeah, I think definitely don't shy away from it. I mean, I come from a design background, which is very transferable, and it's obviously still UX, but initially it was product design. So I've kind of like carved my way into here. And it's interesting, I do often find UX researchers in Google who come from product design, industrial design courses. And so a lot of people don't necessarily come back down the necessary traditional route of being an academic researcher or psychology degree. So yeah, I think just there's a lot of transferable skills basically to make, and just use them to show that you can stand out as well. Don't shy away from them, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think you're so right. I think sometimes people do shy away from it, and actually it's the thing that makes them shine. Because
for sure.
And we have people who take our courses from all different kind of backgrounds, like nursing. There's so many applicable skills, and I think once you know what the skills of a UX researcher are, and we have lots of blog articles written about that, then it's about looking at your own experience and how does that apply to UX research.
100%, because I think 60% of it is honestly soft skills. Like anyone can learn the methods. I firmly believe that anyone can execute it, but you need to be that communicator, that storyteller, blah blah blah. And you get all these skills from totally different industries too. It's not just like unique to UX.
Yeah. And speaking of research methods, then we have a question here that a couple of people are interested in terms of which research methods do you think are most important to master if you wanted to work at a company like Google? And I know there's different research methods. So
Well, there's so many, and honestly, I haven't done them all. I mean, who has, right? So you don't feel for any second that you need to be an expert at everything. Particularly, I mean, in Google and other companies, we differentiate. So I'm technically a qualitative researcher, so I'm not expected to be a master of quantitative research. There's a dedicated person on my team who's a quantitative researcher. So that's just a key example. But yeah, definitely know your bread and butter ones, the ones that you might often be asked to do and you just need to execute quickly. Know how to run a good usability test, a concept test, know how to do a good foundational user interview, where you've got no stimuli and you're just understanding someone. Different things like that. Journey mapping is super important, like personas, different things like that. So I think it's just like, yeah, your bread and butter ones that you probably hear about all the time, but and you can learn on the job too. Like I still learn new methods all the time. And my manager supports me with that. So yeah, we definitely you can carve out different goals to learn different things in UX research too. And there's a lot of methods that fit the same problem. So you can, rely on your strengths too, for something that someone else might do a different way, which is totally fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I think that's really good advice. Given the focus, and I know people are just always wanting to know about portfolios, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your portfolio project from the UX design course or the visual design course that you studied with us, and maybe just a little bit about the tool maybe that you used to create it or where you hosted your portfolio.
Oh, I could quickly I shot no. I made it on Wix, believe it or not. I'm a big Wix fan. I did a few nixes on Wix before, like while I was working, and made some different websites. And you have pretty good autonomy, without having to know how to code, which is obviously my barrier. Obviously, I know people use Webflow and stuff, but I never jumped into that. I found it a bit intimidating. But there's a lot of interesting Figma plugins now as well to directly export your Figma designs into code. And then with things like ChatGPT and Bard, you can give it this of code and just be like, hey, help me out, make this a website. So honestly, I feel like there's and that's one way that AI can really lift UX designers who don't code up anymore, because simple HTML coding and stuff like that's just a super easy thing for it to do. So yeah, but I made mine on Wix, and then it's very simple, honestly.
Yeah. I think if you're not a coder, keeping it simple is certainly not a bad
thing. And honestly, you don't have to over worry, particularly in your UX research, about the visuals. You're not going to be graded on that. It's nice to make it look nice, but I would just rely on it being simple and working well and just communicating well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And just on that note, I noticed a question there, somebody asking about, is it important to be able to use tools like Figma as a UX researcher? I know people will be familiar with Figma in the design world, but do you use it much? Do you see it as important?
I do, but it's not required. Most people, no, most UX researchers don't. But you can use it for making a nice email, and then you can just give it to ChatGPT to convert into for you. So I've done that a few times. Or you can also, sometimes you're in the middle of sessions and there's something wrong with the prototype, and one of our engineers made a really cool Figma plugin that we can upload it directly onto the watch real time. When you design for watch. So it's really nice for concept testing. So I can just go in and quickly tweak something's broken, so it's nice having that background to know how to do that. But I don't think it's necessary at all. A really good tool that I love though is FigJam. So FigJam is really nice for workshops and brainstorming and affinity mapping and journey mapping and all the mapping. So yeah, I really like FigJam. It's just super accessible. I think anyone can use it. We invite our cross-functional stakeholders to use it as well a lot. Or Miro. Miro is another great one, competitor to FigJam.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. So a bit of a question then about recruiting people for research, which can always, it can represent a challenge. And I know in your presentation, you mentioned the importance of recruiting the right people. which is really important. So how do you go about recruiting users for testing at Google?
Yeah. So we're very fortunate in the sense that we have our own internal teams that are dedicated for UX recruiting. So you'll submit a request to them, you fill out their form with all the requirements, and they'll basically do it for you. It's very nice. But historically, back in college, you just have to kind of make up a screening survey that for the people you want, post it on LinkedIn, share it with everyone, try get the people you need. You can't be as picky sometimes with that. You don't have the same amount of responses coming in. And scheduling can be a bit of a challenge. In agency, then we used to rely on third-party recruiting agencies that are dedicated. They have dedicated panels, and you'll again submit screening forms to them, and then they'll distribute them to their panels and come back and schedule with you. So yeah, I've kind of been on lots of ends of like completely doing it myself, kind of doing it, and then not doing it much myself at all anymore, which is nice because I don't miss it.
Yeah, it can definitely be a challenge. Okay, so another portfolio question here, which is just about, did you have to create additional projects for your portfolio, or could you get by just on the ones you used from your course? And I know you've mentioned you had more of an interview task-based.
Yeah.
But what's your views on the number of projects in a portfolio?
I think honestly, like 3 is like a sweet spot. Right now, I have more than 3 in, but like the more I look at it, like if you think about it, it comes back to the audience thing. Who has time to go through even more than one? Honestly, like not many people. Like people don't care enough. So you need to just really hit the nail on the head and get them in early. Just don't bloat it with like millions and millions and millions of things. Maybe that's cool, but like no one has time to go through that. So I would just keep it super simple. If you are able to swap in projects on the fly to suit different roles that you apply for, that's cool because some case studies might be applicable to different ones like that. But yeah, I think ultimately keep it at that number. So then if you do the UX courses, obviously you have 2, which is great, 2 great ones. Obviously I came from product design background, so I had college case studies that I relied on too. And then also you just kind of, I did a website to help out a friend once, and then I put that up, and that was kind of like me, I wanted to do a thing, so I wanted something for a portfolio. So yeah, you can kind of do that. But ultimately, like interestingly, in my interview process, I didn't use any of the case studies in my portfolio, but that was because I had internal Google ones already, so they were obviously more suitable. But that just comes down to like choosing bespoke case studies based on like whoever you're interviewing for. Like what are they going to most relate to?
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, we're just about to come up on time, so I might ask one last question if that's okay, Harry. But thank you so much for all your answers and your time so far. We had lots of questions, so we've gotten through as many as we can. But for the last one, we just have a question here. So first of all, compliment for you having such an impressive career to date. Where do you see things going for yourself over the next few years? Do you see yourself kind of continuing in research, or maybe branching into something else, or kind of moving between research and design, or what do you see for yourself?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. Like I don't ultimately see myself in the same job until I retire. But I think for the next short to medium term, probably UX research. And it's nice because you can deviate into different industries and applications of that. So like you're not always stuck maybe just usability testing. You'll get bored of that one day. You want to do different types of research. And I want to find a combo of UX research with a personal passion of mine. That'll be a really nice application, or to be able to utilize it with a social impact. Yeah, so I think that would be a really nice crossover to find that. But do I see myself going back in design? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it works for me. I also don't know if I'd be good enough anymore, honestly. So we'll see. But yeah.
Oh, it's hard for anybody to predict what they'll be doing.
Yeah.
Well, just to say, Harry, thank you so much for your time this evening. It was really great to speak with you, and thank you for being so generous to share your experiences with us all. It's been really great. For anybody who is interested, I'm going to share some details of our courses now, just when we finish up. And I know we had so many questions, we couldn't get through them all, but our own education advisors are always there if anybody would like to book a call to speak to them about breaking into a career in UX and the courses we offer. So Harry, just once again, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, thank you. If people feel free, if I didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out to me somehow, and I can try chat with you if you need to. But yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Harry.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.